Hey YouTube, this is Guy, and today on the review table we have something of a threesome. So, if you've been following my channel for the last couple week or two, I guess, you know that I have received on loan from two different viewers this watch, the Seiko Turtle SRP773, and another viewer sent me this Seiko Sumo SBDC033. Of course, the Seiko SKX007 on the left is my watch, and they've all three been reviewed in the past. These two loaners more recently, and the SKX quite a while ago. So, during those reviews, I had mentioned that I plan on doing a three-way comparison of these incredibly popular Seiko dive watches. So you're not going to get all of the details that you would get in one of my full reviews. Go back into my library and you fish through there. You can find, again, full-length, feature-length reviews on all three of these watches. What I wanted to do was just kind of look at these watches side by side, do a little comparison of the similarities and the differences, kind of give you my opinions on which I prefer, that sort of thing. So hopefully this won't be as long as my normal videos, though I can't make any promises. I do tend to run a little bit long, and for those of you that don't enjoy that, I apologize. But I like putting together these videos. I like looking at watches. I like sharing them with you guys, so I tend to get a little long-winded. Anyway, let's jump right into this. So, what sort of basic information do we need to know to compare these? Basically, I want to talk about prices and sizing, and I've covered this in the previous reviews, but I'm going to cover it again really quick because it's kind of important for this discussion. On the left, the SKX007. Price point comes in between $200 and $225. You can find them online brand new for that price just about everywhere. I double check two places whenever I'm buying watches. Long Island Watches, Mark over there is awesome, or Amazon. Amazon with their great customer service and return policy. Those are the two places that I buy watches, so when I'm price checking watches, that's where I'm looking. That said, the 007, $200 to $225 on the metal bracelet. The Turtle SRP773, between $300 and $400 on the metal bracelet. So quite a substantial jump up in price between these two. And then finally, the Sumo SBDC033, an even bigger price jump. This one comes in at a price point generally between $450 and $500 is what I found. So, they're all affordable, sort of entry-level watches, sub $500 watches, but the watch here on the left, the SKX, is of course the most affordable, and it steps up from there. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the size and dimensions of these watches. And frankly, while they look significantly different in size to the naked eye, I mean, if you're watching this or you're looking, it might be a little less obvious. But in person, this SKX looks significantly smaller than the Turtle. And the Turtle, to me anyway, in some forms looks a little smaller than the Sumo. In other ways, it looks a little bigger than the Sumo. But truth be told, the sizes on these things are very, very similar. For diameters, the Sumo we'll start at the SKX on the left here. The SKX comes in at a diameter on my calipers, and let me preface this by saying this is the calipers that I'm using whenever I'm doing my measurements. Very cheap, plastic caliper, it's not digital. It works though. So keep in mind when I give a size reading, it's based on this. It's not going to be 100% superbly accurate, just so you know. So on my caliper, diameter on this SKX007 comes in at 42 millimeters, maybe 42 and a half, a little over 42. On the Turtle, I get 45 millimeters. And on the Sumo, I also get 45 millimeters. So case diameter on the Sumo and the Turtle, exactly the same on my calipers. So that's pretty interesting. The SKX, though, just a hair. I mean, what are we talking about? Maybe 2.5 millimeters smaller? Not really that much, honestly. So again, 42, 45, 45. The lug widths, 22 millimeters on this SKX and the Turtle. 20 millimeters on the Sumo, however. So keep that in mind. I don't think that that's a huge factor for most people, but I wanted to point that out. Thickness, all basically the same. They're all about 13 millimeters thick. The Sumo might be about 13.5 millimeters thick as opposed to a straight 13, but very, very close to the same size in thickness. Now here's where there's a pretty big difference in size dimensions, and that is the lug to lug dimensions. And by lug to lug, what I'm talking about is from the top of the edge of the lug to the bottom of the edge of the lug. And if you watch my videos, you know that I like to call that the wingspan of the watch. So from lug to lug or wingspan, there is a pretty big difference in one regard on these watches. I got 46 millimeters on the SKX. I got 47 millimeters on the Turtle, so almost identical. However, on the Sumo, that lug to lug distance, quite a bit bigger, 52 millimeters. So 46, 47, 52. So all of the other dimensions are very, very close. Diameter, lug width, thickness, even the lug to lug or wingspan on these two, on the left two watches, the SKX and the Turtle, very, very close. It's just the Sumo that has a very, not very, but, you know, 47 to 52, what are we talking about? 5 millimeters bigger to 6 millimeters bigger. So it does wrap around the wrist quite a bit more because you have such a large lug to lug or wingspan dimension. But really, other than that, these watches are very similarly sized, despite the fact that when you look at them, they don't really look like they're that close to the same size. It's a very strange, I don't know, almost optical illusion. When you look at, let me move the Sumo over. When you look at the Turtle and the SKX, because of the turtle shell case on this guy, it just really does look quite a bit bigger. But the truth of the matter is it's only about 2.5, maybe, roughly 2.5 millimeters bigger. It's crazy how close they are, but how much different they do look. I bet if you could pull off this SKX, you could probably pull off this Turtle. And I'm sure lots of people, I've seen it in different comments, they've said, the Turtle's just too big for me. I challenge you to get your hands on one, purchase it, borrow it, whatever you got to do, and put it on. And I bet you might change your tune. I bet you might feel like maybe it's not too big for me, because it's really not that much bigger than the SKX. And the Sumo, this looks like a big chunky watch. It looks like it would be a great big thick watch, but it's really 13.5 millimeters, half a millimeter thicker than the other two. But something about the way that it is designed and presented makes it look a bit chunky compared to the other two watches. Very, very interesting that subtle changes in design can really influence the overall aesthetic and the way that the dimensions present and how it wears on the wrist. It's very interesting. Now, dimensions out of the way, another big difference between all three of these watches, they all three have a different movement. The SKX, of course, has the 7S26 non-hand winding, non-hacking movement. The Turtle has the 4R36 movement, which is, for all intents and purposes, basically the same movement with hand winding and hacking. You get the same power reserve, get the same accuracy range. The movements in these two watches are really, for all intents and purposes, identical, with the exception that this has the functionality to hand wind on the crown and to hack the movement, that is to stop it from running when you pull the crown out. On the other hand, the Sumo has the 6R15 movement, which is obviously another step above the 4R series of movements. That movement is more accurate, it has a longer power reserve. Overall, it is quite, not a huge, but quite a step up over the other two movements. In my opinion, is it worth the extra money in the movement alone? It's hard to say. There's some value in the extra power reserve. The accuracy range being a little bit tighter, you know, I'm not sure, because it's so much luck of the draw. I've gotten 7S26 watches that are very accurate. As a matter of fact, and I did have to regulate it, but this SKX is extremely accurate for me after I regulated it. And maybe I'll do a video on how to regulate a watch in the future. I don't know. It's kind of a pain. Regardless, when I first got it, it was not super accurate. It wasn't bad. If I recall correctly, it was running fast, 10 or 12 seconds. Now that I've regulated it for the last several months, it's very, very close to dead on. I think it loses about a second per day. But regardless, my point is that while this movement in the Sumo, the 6R15, has a tighter range of accuracy from the factory, there's no guarantee that it will actually be more accurate than this watch out of the box. This watch out of the box could run plus 10, and this Sumo could run plus 15 out of the box, and that would be within specs in both cases. So I'm not sure how much value there is in that regard between these different movements. Positional variance or variation, in other words, this movement here on the SKX, if it's being held up or upside down or crown up or crown down, like very wildly different accuracy readings depending on the position. The 6R15 movement theoretically should have a better range or a better positional accuracy. I don't know if that's really true or not, but that's my understanding, as it's one of the many things that make it a higher quality movement. So the moral of the story is that with the escalation in price on each of these watches, you're getting sort of an escalation in quality in the movements. So that's a factor. Now, I want to really quickly cover all of the things that are basically the same on these watches. They're all three 200-meter divers watches, ISO certified dive watches. Made out of the same 316L stainless steel, if I'm not mistaken. Both have Hardlex crystals, Lumibrite, luminescent glow-in-the-dark material on the dial and handsets. They both have screw-down crowns on a screw-down case back, and they both have 120-click elapsed time bezels. Of course, the styling on the Sumo bezel is different. We'll touch on that perhaps in a little bit, but more or less all those features are the same. The crown is a little bit different. The crown on these two watches, on the SKX and the Turtle, are virtually identical. They're not exactly identical, but they're very, very, very similar. The crown on the Sumo is a little bit different, and it's signed with the Seiko S logo. Now, that's basically the similarities, and that is to say that they're very, very similar watches. However, there are a number of differences. Number one, the SKX is not a Prospex watch. These two watches, the Turtle and the Sumo, are Prospex watches in the Seiko Prospex line. What does Prospex mean? I don't really know. I spent a little time trying to look it up, and I couldn't honestly find any solid information to tell me what makes Prospex a step above any other random Seiko watch. It's called professionals, short for professional specifications. And whether or not that's all just marketing nonsense or if it's really a meaningful designation, I can't answer that question for you. Maybe one of you guys knows and you could fill me in the comments below. That would be cool. Now, differences, again, finishing, a little bit better finishing on the Sumo. I would say that the finishing on the SKX and the finishing on the Turtle are more or less identical. I can't really tell any difference in quality between the finishing, but the finishing on the Sumo, particularly the polished portions, if we look at the sides of the case here, and let me get my little wipe cloth, the polishing is better on the Sumo, and the brushing, while I don't know that it's better, there's a lot more detail. The lines between the polish and the brush portions of this case are a little crisper, I think, a little cleaner. It's just overall, I would say that the finishing on the Sumo is a bit better. The finishing on the SKX and the finishing on the Turtle are okay in my opinion, but if I had to sort of give one of them a bonus point for finishing, I guess I would give it to the Sumo watch. Crowns, again, I did mention briefly. The crowns on these two guys, more or less identical. They're not exactly identical. If you look really, really closely, there's slightly different dimensions on them, but they have the same sort of texturing or knurling, whatever you want to call it. To my eyes, it's close enough to identical that that's what I would call it. On the other hand, on the Sumo, it has a very different crown. The texturing on the crown, significantly different. Not better, in my opinion. It works fine, though, but I prefer the texturing on the other two. And, of course, you have the signed Seiko S there on the crown. All the crowns on these watches are at the 4 o'clock position, though, which is sort of Typical, I guess, for Seiko watches. They like to have those 4 o'clock positioned crowns for some reason. I like it though. I have no complaints there. Moving right along, let's talk about the dials. Again, these are Prospex watches, the Turtle and the Seiko. So unfortunately, the minute hand is covering the Prospex logo at present. But if you looked at the dial there, it would have the little Prospex logo. They are, again, Prospex watches. The SKX007 is not, so you don't have that logo there. Now, another big difference between the dials on these, the markers on the SKX, they're just painted on markers. And while they're perfectly legible, and there's nothing wrong with them other than all of the dust all over my crystal, sorry about that. They're just painted on there. There's nothing special about them. The lume is good, of course, as you would expect with all Seiko watches, that Lumibrite luminescence paint. But the markers aren't applied, they're just painted on. There's nothing super special about them. On the other hand, moving up just one notch, the markers on the Turtle watch, they are applied, but they're weird. They're very like thin. I don't know. It's almost hard to tell. They're not outlined with a nice shiny bright stainless steel outline or anything. Just a very faint. Maybe it's metal outline. I'm not entirely sure if you look at those markers closely. But there are applied markers there, and they look just a little bit nicer. And moving up again, one more step, the markers on the Sumo dial are very nice applied markers with the stainless steel outlines. I mean, it's just an excellent looking dial because of those applied markers, in my opinion. I really like them. Is it, worth a couple $100 extra? That's up to you to decide, I guess. I'll talk about that. Like I was going to say if it were me, but wait, I'll talk about that in closing thoughts. So moving right along, handsets on the SKX and the Turtle, I think they're identical. I can't really tell a difference between them. On the other hand, the handset on the Sumo, while in my opinion equal quality, it's just a different design. I don't think that there's any better or worse. I mean, you could say aesthetically, do you like these two or do you like this one? Aesthetically, for me, I think I prefer the handsets on the SKX and the Turtle. But quality-wise, I really can't say that there's any difference whatsoever. Another difference about the dial layout on these watches, day and date on the SKX and the Turtle, just a date on the Sumo. I don't know that I need a day, honestly, so I'm not sure if that's really a big factor for me. As a matter of fact, just a date window sort of makes it look a little bit cleaner, in my opinion, so maybe that's +1 for the Sumo, but it's not a big deal either way. I mean, the day and date is nice. I never really forget what day of the week it is, though, but the date, I might need to reference that regularly. So, there's that. The bezels on these, the bezels on the SKX and the Turtle, again, identical, just like the handsets. I can't really perceive any difference. The edge of the bezels, I mean, the inserts, everything, the fonts, it all looks the same. On the other hand, on the Sumo, the bezel is quite a bit different. Aside from the fact that it's sort of set into the case, so on the left and right sides, you can't even really grip the bezel. You see how it's set in there. The texture or knurling on the bezel, that's totally different. And the size of the bezel, edge to edge, from the inner edge to the outer edge, it's bigger. The font, of course, is quite a bit different. And I'm not a fan of the font on this bezel at all, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. So overall, the bezel on this watch is quite a bit different. As far as the action of the bezel, rotating it, setting it, they're all very good. I have never had any complaints with any Seiko bezels. So I don't feel like there's any major quality difference between the three in terms of the action, in terms of setting the bezels. So there's that. The SKX does not have drilled lugs on the case. If we look at the lugs on the sides, they're not drilled at all. And it's a pain to get the bracelet off if you want to. I can't even do it with a spring bar tool. I have to use a very fine flathead screwdriver. On the other hand, both the Turtle and the Sumo do have drilled lugs. I like the fact that the Turtle has drilled lugs, and I don't feel like it detracts from the design of the watch, or in particular the case at all. But On the Sumo, I am not crazy about the fact that it has drilled lugs. I think that it sort of messes up the flow of the watch a little bit. I think that I think it was a bad design choice. And the reason I say that, and I covered this extensively in the main review of this watch, is the watch is really nice looking. The finishing is a little bit nicer. And overall, this watch kind of presents a little blingy, a little flashy. It's a little more, I don't know, dressy, not necessarily the right word, but it comes off as looking a little bit more like jewelry than a tool watch. And because of that, having the drilled lug holes there, I find that to be a bit of a detraction. I think that, yes, of course, it makes it much easier to change the straps or the bracelets if you want to, but if I were the designer of this watch, I would have went sans or without drilled lugs. That's just me. Another and probably the last main thing to discuss about these watches are the bracelets. The bracelet on the SKX is widely regarded to be garbage. I don't think it's garbage. I think it's extremely comfortable. I like it quite a bit. The thing that is garbage about the bracelet, and I'm going to slide these out of frame here just for a minute, is the clasp. And the main reason is because there's no push button deployment. It's just a friction lock. See? And then you got the fold over portion. So that's garbage. Like, they need to update the clasp at a minimum. Getting that friction lock clasp open, kind of painful almost. Then when we talk about the quality of the material that the clasp is made out of, it's like paper thin. I will say the fact that it is since it's so thin in this dimension, width or I don't know, depth, I don't know what you'd call that, but because it is so thin, it's comfortable. It doesn't like get banged around a whole lot. The other two clasps, I think, are a hair thicker, and that might be a bit of a detraction. But because it is just a friction locked clasp, like I just demonstrated there, it's a problem. I'm not gonna lie. But the links, they're fine. It is super floppy. Everybody knows this. They could upgrade this to a better Jubilee bracelet with slightly higher quality links, maybe solid end links. As we all know, the end links in the SKX are hollow end links, though I don't have any problem with the hollow end links at all. I've never had issue with them. They're not noisy or rattly or loose. They work just fine. But you do get quite a bit of flex in that bracelet, and that's a big complaint for, I guess, a lot of people. I like the bracelet just fine. I accept that it could be better, but it works okay for me. It's just that clasp that really sucks. On the other hand, the Turtle and the Sumo, for my money, I mean, I'm telling you, these bracelets are identical. Of course, they're different sizes because it's 22 millimeter lugs versus 20 millimeter lugs, but I can't really perceive much of a difference between them. I would say that they're the same clasps, just sized differently. Or not clasps, bracelets. The clasps are better than the SKX because they do have the push button deployment on the sides here. Of course, the fold over. Fewer micro adjustment holes in the SKX though, but that's not a big deal. But you open the fold over, deploy, and overall it's just a little bit better. The quality of material is really not any better though. It is like paper thin stamped, I don't know, stainless steel, some kind of metal. And they are a little bit thicker in this dimension here, so it stands off your wrist a hair more than the clasp on the SKX007 does. But I don't really like either of these bracelets, and the reason why is because they're very, very rigid. I talked about this in the Sumo review. I'll illustrate it here on the Turtle. Each of these links is one piece. On an oyster bracelet, the center portion of the link will be completely independent from the end portions of the link. These are all one piece, as you can see, so it's less flexible, and it makes the clasp pretty rigid, or the bracelet. I keep saying clasp. I apologize. It makes the bracelet pretty rigid. I just don't really prefer that. I wish that each of the links were individual pieces like a typical oyster bracelet. It's not bad, it's comfortable, it works, but, and that's why I have to lay them out like this stupid configuration, because if the bracelet is closed and you try to set it down, you see you can't really get it flat, it kind of weeble wobbles, it's That's one of the reasons why I don't like that style of link. But like I said, it works. It's not bad. There's, you know, it's not like a huge problem or anything. Just not my preferred style. I would prefer just a standard oyster bracelet. So, I mean, you know, I could go on probably a little bit more. That's basically the main things that I wanted to cover. What I want to say in my closing thoughts are the question that I'm sure people are going to want to know: which one do I like better? I wish, this is going to be two parts. Number one, I do have a favorite, and I'll just tell you right now. My favorite is the SKX, and it's because, despite the fact that I said at the very beginning the dimensions are not all that dissimilar from one another, it does wear small. On the wrist, it feels like a much smaller watch, despite the fact that it's really not. And while I do have a reasonably large, medium to large sized wrist at 7 inches, and I have worn these a little bit, even though they're loaners. I've worn them around my house, and I can pull either one of them off. They fit just fine. I don't feel like they're overwhelming. I prefer a little bit of a smaller watch, and the SKX is that for me. So what's the second part of that question? While, okay, I do prefer, my favorite is the SKX, I wish that I could make a Frankenstein version of almost like all three of these. Like number one, I wish that I had at a minimum, the 4R 3/6 movement inside the SKX case. I wish that I had maybe the Sumo's dial in the SKX case with those beautiful applied markers and just the date window aperture. I wish that maybe I had a little bit nicer finishing like the Sumo's polishing does. The SKX, the sides of the case are polished, but it's not quite as nice as the Sumo's in my opinion. Of course, I wish that we could upgrade the bracelet in some regards on the SKX. So I wish that I could kind of Frankenstein my own Seiko SKX007 Pro Specs version of the watch. And my friend, well, he started out as a viewer. I consider him a friend now. My friend that loaned me this watch, the Turtle, or no, I'm sorry, the guy that loaned me the Sumo. Both are great guys. So it's not like, oh, you're not my friend. That's not what I mean at all. But I've been conversing back and forth about watches for quite a while now with the fellow that loaned me this Sumo. And I think that's what he did. I think he took an SKX009 and I think he Frankensteined together a watch with an upgraded movement in it. I don't remember if it was the 4R or the 6R movement. Swapped some dials around. I think he kind of put together exactly what it is that I would want in my quote-unquote perfect Seiko dive watch. I'm not that creative. I'm not that technically inclined, so I'm probably never going to try that. And it would be expensive. I mean, you got to buy a couple donor watches to sort of gut them and reassemble them, and I don't really want to go down that road with the expense either. So that brings us back to the 007 being my favorite. Alright guys, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this comparison video. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, whatever, leave them down below. If you're interested in purchasing any of these watches, I'll throw links in the video description box to my Amazon affiliate account. If you click through on those links, you know, I get a small commission, which helps me out immensely. So yeah, that's it. I appreciate it. And we'll be back here with some more review videos shortly. All right, guys. Bye.